Hello and welcome to the Environmental Answers podcast. My name is Tiana Alame. I'm your host. I'm really excited today to learn so much about is Elysabeth Alfonso, right?
Alfano, yeah.
Alfano.
Yeah.
Okay. So could you tell me a little bit about yourself and what is VegTech Invest? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah. So for a long time now, my career in the finance world and also in the consulting advisor world has been around food innovation and food systems transformation, really. And that's going to mean the entire food system. I'm sure we'll get into that and what that looks like, what that means. But so with VegTech Invest, where I'm the CEO, we are focused on investing in a food system that works for everyone. That's going to include people today in the West, but also people in Africa and around the world, and not just getting them good food, but getting them, healthy food that doesn't actually destroy our natural resources, biodiversity, and climate in the making. So the current food system, many people don't know. They walk into Costco and they think like, hey, looks good to me. There's lots of food around. Everything's fine. And indeed, that's just simply not the case. I'm sure we'll get into it. But as one little indicator, the U.S. Department of Defense is spending 35% of their R&D innovation in the bioindustrials field on food innovation. Now, usually that would have been 100% on things like chemical warfare, et cetera. And they're doing 35% on food innovation, about 30% on materials innovation, and about the remainder on normal warfare as we would think about it. So why is the U.S. Department of Defense considering food innovation an issue of national security? It's because our food system is not working for us. And we saw that in COVID, right? You remember it. The food fell apart. You couldn't find flour. You couldn't make bread at home. There was meat shortages. So that is not a resilient system that falls apart so quickly. And that's just going to be exacerbated with climate change and population growth. So the current food system we have doesn't work, but that's also a great investment opportunity.
No, that's clear. I guess like winding it back a little bit about how did you find yourself at this point, like getting here?
Yeah.
What led you to this point?
Yeah. So when I changed my own diet, which I did just for health reasons, I just wanted to be healthy and thought, gosh, I don't need meat and dairy in my repertoire. I mean, I can do better than that. I want fiber in my life, right? I don't want saturated fat. Come on. So I kind of thought, I'm getting rid of meat and dairy. But once I changed from a diet perspective, I naturally used the tool set that I have, which is, I went to business school and I spent a long time in journalism as well. So I had public speaking skills and then I had these business skills. I naturally started putting my business skills to the test and sort of saying like, well, what's going on in the food system and, what options do we have? And I started looking into the business equation that is our food system. And I thought, what an awful business equation. So, for example, why is food the leading cause of deforestation and biodiversity loss? Well, 80 billion animals are in animal factories. We have to feed them. So we cut down trees that could pull carbon from the air, but okay, whatever. We cut down trees, we grow all these crops that have fiber and protein. Do we give that food to people? No. We give that food to animals, and then they need more land and water and time. Oh, got to cut down more trees, got to grow more crops, got to monocrop, destroying the soil in the process and its nutrients. Are we giving that food to people? No, we're still giving it to animals. You see the inefficiency of this business equation, this very long, unresilient supply chain and very high cost of goods sold because it's got this very expensive middleman in the middle. So it turns out we are bad at feeding people. We're great at feeding animals, but we're bad at feeding people. So if we want to be smarter with our resources like land and water, because we're getting more people on the planet, we're going from 8 billion people to 10 billion people, according to the United Nations by 2050. We're also getting a developing middle class in Africa, India, and China. Everybody's wanting more stuff, and of that stuff, meat is included. So there's higher demand, but you're not getting more land, and you're certainly not getting more water, much less water in the years to come. So you have to think, well, how am I going to use my natural resources so that I can feed everybody? This is why it's an issue of national defense. When people don't have food and water, they don't just sit around. They go to where there's food and water. That means the US, Canada, et cetera. So that's why it's an issue of national security. you have to feed everyone on the planet for geopolitical stability. So, when I started looking into these things, the politics of it, the business of it, I thought, oh my gosh, I should really be involved in this more than just a diet, but really from a business perspective. And when I dove into the business propositions, I thought, well, for sure, I want to invest in food innovation because I can see that the current math isn't working. And that's a necessity. That's not like crazy vegans on a street corner or something. I mean, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking like at a massive, large global scale, food isn't working. So I thought, well, I want to invest in the novel innovations. If I knew about the cell phone before,
like at the beginning, you would have invested in cell phone,
I would have invested in cell phones, right? And digital imagery and stuff. If I knew that printing pictures was going away, I would have gone for the new technology. Now I looked everywhere and I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything in food innovation. So that's when we started
when you first started, like what were some of like the untapped, or I guess what are you seeing as untapped opportunity in this market? Because I know you're talking about food innovation and what you guys are currently investing, but I'm like, what is that? What could you define it a little bit for our audience?
Sure. I'll just take a step back. First of all, I think people sometimes have a tricky time understanding the scale of the food system. They see their own plate and then they don't realize like, oh, wow, like the global implications. And yeah, so the food system actually has a really long supply chain and we invest up and down the supply chain. So anything that's going to start with the farmer going all the way to your plate. So some of the novel innovations, a lot of AI obviously coming into the space. So if you think of the way we farm now, you might spray chemicals everywhere to protect plants from this, that, and the other thing. Well, what if you could determine with AI just a small part of the crop that was sick? Then you would spray chemicals only on that, and you would not spray chemicals on the rest of it because none of the people want chemicals and the land doesn't either. And neither do the bugs and pollinators and bees. And I mean, this is what keeps an ecosystem going is its biodiversity. So the mass spreading of chemicals is unwanted. And with AI, you can start to precision only water the plants that need it when they need it. You can start.
The stuff that you all are investing in, right? Like this is dynamic. That's really dynamic to be able to look at it and just that is what we're spraying versus like before it was like blanketing things, which will then impact our health. A lot of like what I think about is that indirectly what you're or directly is related to our health. Would you say so?
100%. 100%, because, it's not just what we're eating on those vegetables. And of course, most people, wash their food, et cetera, but, it's in the soil.
Right.
It's in the soil. And the soil is so depleted that when, we used to get B12 from soil, you'd have some veggies, there'd be a little bit of dirt still on the veggies, and you'd be taking in the nutrients of the soil. That's equally as important to the food itself. Now the soil's so decimated, you're getting no nutrients from the soil. So if you don't eat meat, you take a B12 supplement. And if you eat meat, you're getting a B12 supplement because one of the things in all the meat, along with the hormones and antibiotics, are B12 supplements because neither animal nor human is getting the nutrients from the soil anymore. So just to show you how important we call ag tech, all this agricultural technology at the very beginning of the supply chain, how important it is.
That's very important. Something that we're very interested in Environmental Answers is understanding like how you define the word sustainability and how that feeds into it. So when you think about sustainability, how would you define it?
I would define sustainability as the long-term vision and understanding for protecting natural capital. Natural capital being our land, our water, our natural resources, which are not infinite, despite what we might think. So I would say a long-term vision, goal, and understanding of protecting our natural capital.
Well, that's very clear. I really appreciate that. I know that like something that we're also constantly grappling with is like the fear of whatever when it comes to the environment. And I think something that you help with, at least from what you shared, is investing in removing that fear. Would you say that, especially when it comes to our food support?
That there's fear that food. I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understand the question. That there's fear that
It's
going
about
away.
a fear around food security. So a
Oh
big
yeah,
part of what I hear is that you're removing that by investing in the innovative technology and supporting the removal of that fear part. A lot
yeah,
of the people that we reach out to or reach out to us, some of the students that we'll get emails from or questions from, they're like, oh, maybe, food might be an issue, right, in the future. So like, some of the technology that you're investing in, it sounds like it's going to help, reduce that for people.
yes. When we look at our thesis, we're looking at our investment thesis. We're looking at creating more food that is more nutritious while using fewer resources in a shorter amount of time and creating less damage. So we can create a better supply chain, better business model. It's really a systems overhaul to create more food that is more nutritious without depleting natural resources and creating, environmental damage.
When you say that, what are some of the key challenges, I guess, you see with these adopters like switching? Because I know that would mean that if you're overhauling a system, you might see like, are there any challenges that that are kind of consistent?
Sure. There's the money challenge. So systems
Okay.
only are overhauled when there's enough investment in them. They don't
Okay.
overhaul themselves on the
Okay.
fly for cheap. If you want to go from the landline to the cell phone, if you want to move to electric vehicles from gas vehicles, you're gonna have to invest for that shift. So we're looking at investment dollars from governments as well as philanthropic, like Gates Foundation, and Bezos Earth Fund, big investors both in food innovation. You're looking at VC money, startup money, and then you're also looking at Wall Street money. And you need all of it. You need all of it all the time, everywhere. So you're going to need a lot of money. That's challenge one. Challenge two, there are incumbents that don't want the shift to take place. So, you're going to have to contend with the meat lobby, which is up there with the pharmaceutical lobby, tobacco lobby. Let's face it, these folks run politics. That's who runs the show. So you're going to have to really contend with that. Luckily, the meat lobby is going to make a lot of money. Not the lobby itself, they're a lobby, but the meat industry is going to make a lot of money because we're not saying don't sell products and we're not saying don't make money. We're just saying you could feed more people by adopting novel innovations and focus less on the old school production of meat, which hasn't seen innovation. And we basically animal husbandry to the nth degree in large factories. We've been doing that since, the 50s and the 60s. There's not real innovation happening there. That innovation curve is over from an investment standpoint. Now there's this new innovation curve happening, which is a really exciting place to be investing. And, if the meat industry would adopt that, they're the ones who are going to make all the money. They've got the distribution channels and they've got the big global teams and the advertising budgets. So there's a lot of money to be made here. And I'm just waiting for the industry to embrace that. So those are the two challenges I think of.
The main challenges you think of when I'm hearing you talk, I guess what comes to mind to me is like thinking about like, are there partners or systems that you guys have internally for communicating? Like, what are some things that people are saying? Is it like, I used to work for like a direct seller and they would tell us to say like, make sure people vote with their dollars. So like as me as an individual, like, is it me choosing to maybe buy vegetable grown meat, or like what would be like a way that like as a consumer I could help?
Okay. I two things here. I don't want to ever say that the consumer is not important. That is not what I'm saying. The consumer, of course, is extremely important. But this kind of an industrial shift, I do think is going to happen from the business level first. And it's just with our natural capital decreasing, that makes natural capital, land and water, more expensive. This makes business cost of goods sold more expensive. And at some point, it's going to be cheaper to use the novel innovations. And we'll talk about that in a second, because I want people to understand like what kind of food is their way. But these novel innovations are going to be less expensive because they use fewer natural resources and have shorter supply chains and are more resilient and bring diversification, then the industry will adopt. And once the industry adopts novel innovations, they'll use their advertising budgets and distribution channels to tell the consumers, hey, look at all the choices you have. Look at it like this. What could you ever do to the all-holy potato chip? It's perfect. It's potatoes and oil and salt. It's wonderful. So apparently I'm wrong. There's a lot you can do to the potato. You can bake it, not fry it. You can make it whole grain. You can have a beet chip, a pita chip, a tortilla chip. It can be square. It can be triangle. It can be in a bag. It can be with ridges. It can be in a can. We can be a sun chip. I don't even know what a sun chip is. People love it. Okay, so you go down the grocery, right? Like, what is a sun chip? Does anyone know? I don't think so. So you walk down the potato chip aisle, and you see that the potato chip is still doing quite well. It's very healthy. No one has put the potato chip out of business. But it's an entire grocery store aisle dedicated to a chip. So you see how resilient that sector is because it has diversification. It has more options. So as soon as the meat industry can embrace that meat isn't going away, but you need to just bring in more options for the resources, for the reasons we've discussed, they're more environmentally sustainable for the long haul. Then consumers will have more options, and consumers will start to learn about these options. And some of these options might be things like the following. Maybe you'll have you're always going to have your animal factory stuff. Fast food's not going away. So that's going to exist. You're going to have your regenerative meat, which is, animals that aren't in factories, but those are really environmentally expensive because they're using more land and more water. They're being treated well like natural animals, which means they have time and land and no hormones, and they're not being pushed to grow so that's really expensive. And it's only going to be for the elite, honestly. It's not going to be able to feed the world. So you're going to have other options in there. So in addition to those two, which aren't going away, you're going to have, let's say, a beef hamburger, but 50% of it will be umami mushrooms. And it'll be a blend of beef and mushrooms. And so, because of beef, 32% of the world's global methane emissions attributable just to beef. 32%, 1/3 of the world's global methane emissions just attributable to beef. 41% of the world's global deforestation is because of animal factories. These are incredible numbers. You're not going to fix climate change if you don't address animal factories. You're just not. So if you are a conscientious consumer, you want to take down your environmental footprint. Well, maybe you're getting a blended burger of beef and mushrooms, for example. There's also fermenting microbes, which might sound weird, but we ferment yeast for bread. We ferment beer. I think people on this podcast have had beer. I think there's a good chance there's someone in the audience who's had some beer. So, okay, it's not we ferment foods all the time. So we're going to start fermenting proteins. In fact, AB InBev, largest fermenter in the world, they're a beer company. They ferment beer and they already ferment proteins. So we're going to start coming up with these other ways of fermenting proteins. And when you ferment microbes into proteins, it's just like a blank slate. It's like an unseasoned chicken. It's just, you could make it sweet, you could make it savory, you could do whatever you want. So then they're going to, use spices and stuff, and you're going to have.
I feel like I'm hearing like a whole new restaurant industry coming out of this because
totally.
I've seen a lot of different things on like the menu when it comes to like different food, but that sounds like a menu or a restaurant that could that's the innovation right there in my mind, is like a whole new opportunity.
Yeah. And that's where real money's made. So money isn't made because some company went up 2% one quarter over the next quarter. Money's made when you shift from, printing your pictures at Walgreens, waiting 48 hours for them to be ready, spending $20, and then 50% of the pictures are like your thumb. So, we move from that to digital imagery, and everybody wants to adopt it because it's so much better. That's where you make real money. Now you're talking mass adoption and big money.
So some of our listeners may not have I don't have an MBA, but I have some business language. One of the things that I know that people say a lot, but maybe not everyone understands, is the simpleness of like the words chain supply. When you say chain supply, what do you mean by that? And could you conceptualize that for maybe someone who hasn't thought of that term before?
Yeah, sure. So the whole supply chain. So We were talking about ag tech before. Remember that precision watering, precision chemical use, so anything that's happening on the farm, electric tractors rather than fuel tractors, that's all considered ag tech. That would be the very beginning of the supply chain. And then we'd go to biotech. So that would be like fermenting proteins, like we were talking about, these kind of novel innovations that can happen through biology and technology coming together. Then the next step on the supply chain, you might have novel ingredients. So rather than considering growing crops to feed pigs and then fattening the pigs and then eating the pigs, you could just grow crops, and maybe you're going to grow not just soy to feed to pigs, which would be monocropping the soil and depleting the soil. You could start to grow barley and chickpea and lentils, and now you have other kinds of really high protein foods that you could grow and feed directly to people in the form of, chickpea burgers, lentil burgers, whatever. And it doesn't have to be a burger, but chickpea is just an amazing food, by the way. It's got that yeah, I love it too. It's got that aquafaba, that juice that the chickpea sits in. That's a great emulsifier to not use dairy. Again, dairy cows, such an environmental nightmare. I mean, and then for those who care about animal welfare, which I'm seeing come up more and more, God forbid you're a dairy cow. At least the meat cows die. Oof, God almighty. I won't go into it, but okay. Don't come back as a dairy cow. That's all I'm saying. Really, honestly, it's awful.
It's just the way that you say it. I hear you. I was looking at on your website about like the ETF specifically. I guess when I was asking a question about like how can consumers like come and support, is that a way an individual consumer could maybe come and support?
Yes, definitely. So there's diet change, and then there's also investing in opportunities in the market that give you exposure to these novel innovations, so that when the food system shifts, and I won't lie, the meat lobby is going to have to lighten their grip a little bit, or they're going to have to see that
longer. Yeah.
They're in the way for sure until they realize that there's money to be made for them. And then they're going to shift really quickly, because this old system is not working. It takes up too much resources. It's too long. So, and people keep growing. So it's just the math isn't working for that. So as soon as they shift, it's going to happen really quickly. And I just want to say something before I go into the consumer again. It took a long time to shift to the electric vehicle. Cell phones are pretty quickly. That adoption took place pretty quickly. It's because it was a lot cheaper. Yes, cell phones are expensive. iPhones are expensive. I get that. But, a new electric vehicle is $60,000. So you think twice before you run out and spend $40,000, $60,000, whatever you're doing. Oh, the iPhone, you've got it on payment plan. Okay, you can make it happen. So it's pretty quick to go to the cell phone. And food's going to be really fast too, because that technology fermentation, it's just not that hard to ferment proteins when you've been fermenting beer your whole life. So the technology is there. It's not that hard. It's going to shift pretty quickly as soon as the lobbyists get their mind wrapped around it. That sector gets their mind wrapped around it. So from the consumer standpoint, you can buy things that aren't meat and dairy. That kind of helps to make the shift. And you can invest in options in the public markets to get exposure to the new innovation. Those are two ways consumers can help.
That's really helpful. We talked a little bit, well, you talked actually a good amount about, one of my questions was like looking into the future, what some of the major shifts you foresee specifically in the food and sustainability industry. And it sounds like it's these microbes fermentation. Were there any other trends that you see coming across?
I do think you're going to see more and more non-dairy options, non-animal options. So there's this other kind of fermentation process, which is very cool. And that is you take a gene from basically a scientific database, but I guess you could take it from the cow. It was originally taken from a cow, but now it's in a scientific database. But you take the gene and you put the gene in a controlled environment that it likes. You feed it, sugars and amino acids and things, and you grow just the gene that makes casein or whey. Have you ever heard of casein or whey?
I've heard of whey. Like I think of like whey protein, but like
Right, whey
whey.
protein, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So casein is really what's used when you make cheese. It's that thing that makes it really like fatty and stretchy and melty and stuff. So if you just grew the casein or the whey, which you see in a lot of protein bars and protein powders, then you don't need to grow the whole cow. You're just growing the casein, and then you add sugar and fat and you've got cheese. Or maybe not cheese, you add fat, you've got cheese, so, or you've got sugar and fat, you've got ice cream, so that you don't have to spend, like cows don't make milk on their own, right? They have to be pregnant, and as soon as they have a baby, the baby's taken away, so the mother and baby are separated, and that's an awful life. And then you're pregnant again. And so you don't have to do that whole thing. You don't have to commercialize the female reproductive system and make money off that. You can just grow the casein to get your cheese, so it's a lot better.
No, I hear you. And I appreciate you breaking it down and talking to us like that about it, because, these aren't they're multi-level problems. Like there's like layers to it, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So many layers to it. And I think, what I really appreciate about being able to talk to you is that you're able to address all of the layers and keep us on track. And keeping us on track is like what we need to do. This is a solution. A real solution is like invest in innovation, specifically in our food infrastructure. There's clearly things that are broken, and we could probably run off a long list of all the things that is broken, but it's kind of like, how much time do we fix on that? We need to document it. People need to be aware of it. That's a big part of what we want at Environmental Answers, is that more people to be more educated about. We like to say, what is it? Environmental intelligence, like AI or EI, environmental intelligence. Increasing everyone's EI or environmental intelligence is so important, so that one, we don't repeat history. You know what I mean? The likelihood of us going back, imagine like if we do all this, let's say in 2025, but then like 100 years from now, if it's not documented, could people start all over and say, that's the innovation, what we're doing now is an innovation? We want to make sure that people are aware that we've done it this way before and the reason why we got here. So I really appreciate you just breaking down the multi-level problem. So did you have anything else that you wanted to share with us specifically when we talk about that problem?
I do. And that is, according to the United Nations, the top 2 reasons for the next pandemic. Not the one we're still fixing now, because if you're worried about the economy, the reason we have quantitative tightening now is because we had so much quantitative easing in COVID. What do I mean by that? Why is the economy contracting and interest rates remain high? Because during COVID, we were giving out so much money, quantitative easing. We were letting so much money into the supply chain. Maybe you remember, like, you stayed home from work and you got a check, and you got a check from the government. So you got double pay, but no productions happening. So this is, an overkill for having too much money in the supply chain, and now we're tightening it with inflation that you see at the grocery store because of interest rates going up. You see this tightening, contracting of the economy. Okay, so we are still, even if the COVID thing is gone, the environmental impact, the economic impact, oh my gosh, we're still experiencing. Well, we're not talking about COVID, we're talking about the next pandemic. Top 2 reasons are the intensification of animal factories. And that would make sense, because when you're living butt to snout in your own feces, of course you're going to spread disease. So, do you want another pandemic? I do not. I do not. I mean, we're not even addressing the pandemic risk from having so many animals live in these conditions. And, so it's not just a health care crisis. The leading cause of diseases are things like diabetes, heart attacks, colorectal cancer. These are all diet related things, so it's not just our health care, but now our health care costs, because pandemics are expensive, lifestyle diseases are expensive. So, it's environmental impact, food insecurity, but also health care and healthcare costs.
No, I really appreciate, one, that you highlighted those 3 pieces as like critical to what it's all impacting. So like if we don't spend time on changing and making major changes, it's unfortunate that so many people are dealing with what you've said and what I know to be is like food related, like lifestyle choice diseases, and a lot of it has to deal with the fact that like some of the options on the shelf that are most accessible for people, I think, are those that are quick, easy. I mean, we talked about the potato chip on this podcast episode already. I know that most people I know have potato chips, but we also know that though they're tasty, those can be things that aren't the best for our bodies. So having these new options, it sounds like, is something that's coming down the pipeline. And that actually, for me, leaves me with hope that we can get to a better place. And so I really, really appreciate this time. If there were any people that were interested in collaborating with you and the work that you're doing, what is the best way for them to learn how to collaborate?
Yes, please come find me on LinkedIn. It might take me 2 or 3 days to get back to you because that inbox on LinkedIn is pretty full, but come find me on LinkedIn. That's always going to be a place where I'll be.
Okay, yeah. So her name, could you spell it for us? Because there's some people who are listening.
Sure, Elysabeth, and that's going to be spelled differently. So Elysabeth, Alfano, ALF as in Frank, ANO, and that's LinkedIn's going to be the best way to find me.
Well, I really appreciate this time that you spent with us explaining things from the supply chain to understanding what's going on with the food here in the United States, but understanding that there are things that are coming down the pipeline and there are places that are investing in making sure that we have a better system overall. So we want to say thank you to you, and thank you listeners to coming to this episode of the Environmental Answers podcast, where we're here to bring clarity on what's up and what's what. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you again soon. All right.
Bye, everybody.